The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
No matter what you're talking about, whether it's the beauty of a story or the beauty of a person or the beauty of an artwork or a landscape, that beauty is about the mingling of all these different elements, right? And that's what I mean by entanglement, that you have this explosion of difference that yet despite all of those different parts, it holds together in an alluring way.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Wesley Vander is a pastor, theologian, writer, teacher, nonprofit leader, and arts advocate with a passion for beauty, slowness, cultivation, and kinship. He currently works as the acting director of the Leighton Ford Center for Theology, the Arts, and Gospel Witness, and adjunct professor of theology at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in Charlotte. He is also the co-founder of Kinship Plot, a community of learning and practice, imagining and embodying resonant relationships of every kind. His new book is Beauty as Oxygen, Finding a Faith That Breathes. In this episode, Wes and I discuss just how necessary beauty is. Wesley Vander, I'm so glad to have you on the Habit Podcast. Thanks for being here. I'm excited about your new book, Beauty as Oxygen. So I'm always interested in talking about beauty. So thanks for writing this book. Subtitle, Finding a Faith That Breathes. I guess we should start with as quick as possible. Give me a working definition of beauty, just for the sake of our discussion. I know people write whole books and long articles arguing about the definition of beauty. We're not looking for that. What do we need to know about beauty from your book, Wesley?
Yeah, beauty is notoriously difficult to define, but I think one of the simplest ways to describe what beauty is to say it's the alluring traces of God's glory in the world. That could be in the natural world, could be in human culture, but it's the alluring wholeness of these traces of God's glory.
And why do you say that beauty is oxygen? What do you mean by that?
Beauty is oxygen because it's necessary, as opposed to something that's just marginal in our lives. It's everywhere, and it's something that only really comes to us as a gift.
Yeah, good. I like that. Necessary, how? But play that out a little bit. I'd like to hear more about that. Why is beauty not a luxury?
Yeah, we're used to thinking about truth as necessary. We need to know the truth and goodness as necessary. We need to live well. But beauty is often that ugly stepchild of those three: truth, goodness, and beauty, because we see it as just something that is a nice add-on to life, that we need truth and goodness, but beauty, it's only if you have the time or have the certain luxury. But no, it's actually necessary, because beauty is what moves us into relationships. It forms our attachments. It forms our desires. And it's often, I talk about a beauty first approach to life, because often it's the beauty of people, the beauty of things, the beauty of experiences and the beauty of God that first we encounter before we even come to know the truth or to do what's good.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard people talk about the idea that both truth and goodness, we think of those as requiring some kind of discipline from us. Like we pursue truth, we pursue goodness, but beauty sneaks up on us, right? Beauty is something that comes to us rather than us pursuing it. I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested that might be something to discuss. I can't decide the extent to which I agree with it. Certainly in large part. I'm probably somewhere around the edges, it may not be right. What do you think about that idea? You probably ran across that idea in your work.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about. Beauty, I think, requires something different and yet similar than those other things, in that in order to really take in beauty, we need to be available to it, which is difficult, I think, sometimes in our culture of speed and busyness, that we need to show up and we need to be present and we need to be available so that beauty can do its work.
Yeah. Let's see how to ask this. You talk about the idea that beauty can't just be, I can't think of it strictly in terms of what I find appealing or what I find alluring. There's something about my, or I guess the way you phrase it, it can't be reduced to that which I find, what I like and find alluring. I do like beauty. I do find it alluring, right?
Yeah.
I guess you're suggesting that the Venn diagram of what I find alluring and what I like and beauty, there's overlap, but not complete overlap.
Yeah, that's right. There's a common idea that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So it's kind of this subjective thing that whatever my preference is, whatever I find alluring, I'm just going to call that beauty. But that limits this key aspect of reality just to my preferences, and someone else is going to have a different experience of reality and a different sense for what's beautiful. And so, yes, beauty is always bigger than what I think is nice or pleasant or alluring. And beauty itself is much more than what's pleasant, because if God is beauty, that needs to impact how we think about where beauty is and what beauty is and all those things.
Yeah. Yeah. You spend a lot of time talking about Christian Wyman's idea of every riven thing, that beauty is to be found. I guess the exact passage he's talking about, God is found in every. Actually, what's help me with the actual thing that Christian Wyman said.
Yeah, every riven thing is, I think, one of the best poems ever written. I love Wyman's stuff.
Yeah.
But the line that's repeated in that poem, and he breaks it down and says it in different ways, is that God goes belonging to every riven thing. And then he unpacks each of those phrases. And I think that's so profound. And if you just insert beauty in there, God's beauty goes belonging to every riven thing. It's going to do lots of important things, I think, for us. Going to help us think about how beauty goes beyond the subjective, like we've talked about. This is God's beauty, not just the beauty that I think is worthy of my attention. But then it takes beauty beyond this static thing, this thing we can kind of grasp and control, because God's beauty goes. It's always
Yeah.
moving, it's encountering us, it's arriving. So it's kind of personal in that sense. And then God's beauty goes belonging. And I love Wyman's poem because I can't quote the next lines, but saying how God goes belonging to particular people and to this rock and to this landscape and to this, conversation. And so beauty is not abstract. It's always about this thing and that thing and you and I and this conversation, And then there's that to every riven thing, which is challenging because we need to start to think about how beauty is not ugly things, right? There's still ugliness in the world.
Yeah.
And yet beauty can belong to or arise out of even situations that seem pretty ugly.
Yeah. That's good. I so appreciate your observation that beauty directs us out, beyond ourselves. It's hard to be self-absorbed in the presence of beauty. And so, if we do reduce beauty to that which I like and that I find alluring, I'm still treating myself as the measure of all things. Whereas a real experience with beauty goes beyond, my inner life. It expands my inner life out into reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I love that idea. And as you also say that the other reason that beauty can't be reduced to what I like and find alluring is that I'm probably going to be insufficiently attentive and receptive and imaginative to receive the beauty that's on offer.
Yeah. Yeah, beauty is always a conversation with others, and we bring our experiences together, and through sharing those experiences and through dialogue, we come to realize that beauty is a very expansive thing, and it's can't be owned by any particular culture or perspective, and that's so refreshing. It's so refreshing in the time of such polarization and us versus them, and thinking that we have somehow the handle on what's true and good and beautiful. It's very humbling.
Yeah.
I think beauty is constantly humbling us.
Yeah. What can we talk a minute though about the idea that I think it maybe, I hope it's fair to say that a true encounter with beauty dampens my acquisitiveness. Right. I don't have to possess, I can admire the Rocky Mountains. I don't have to possess the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah.
And yet our experiences with beauty aren't entirely free of acquisitiveness or consumerism or, talk to me about that. I guess beauty can set us free from that. What are the dangers? What are the traps?
Yeah, I think the difference is that true encounters with beauty move us to want to participate in it rather than kind of grasp it or control it. It's the difference of when I am overcome by the beauty of my children. And we say this weird thing, I could just eat you up.
Yeah.
It's this idea of, I can't get close enough to you. You're so beautiful, you know?
I had an uncle who would say, get that kid away from me. I might take a bite out of him.
Exactly.
It's a little strange. That was a little too specific.
Yeah. Right. But I think that's getting at something really true and profound. It's not that I want to have it. It's that I want to be so close to it that I just get immersed, in all of that beauty. And that I might become beautiful like that. So I think there's this longing for transformation when we encounter beauty. It's not that we can become that beautiful mountain landscape, but whatever those traces of divine glory are shining off that mountain, I'd want to be in it.
Yeah. Yeah. On the other hand, there are publications with names like House Beautiful. There is beauty in interior decorating.
Oh yeah.
And yet I think it's safe to say that a magazine like House Beautiful is devoted to making me want to buy stuff.
Sure.
And
yeah, and beauty, the reason why it took me so long to write this book is all of the different ways that beauty has kind of been abused in contemporary culture and before. Yeah. And one of those is just beauty being harnessed to sell things. And of course, it's not a bad thing to make things beautiful, to build a business and to make a living and things. I wanted the cover of this book to be beautiful so people might be more inclined to buy it. That's not a bad thing. But we just need to recognize, that that's not why beauty exists.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. You mentioned it took you a long time to write this book. How long did it take you to write this book?
Well, it started as I used to be a lead pastor, and I did this sermon series back in 2017 where I started teasing out the idea. And I had grandiose ideas of being able to write the book while a pastor, which was just not working for me. So
that worked, huh? Yeah.
I started writing it during the pandemic and finished it. It took me about a year and a half to write it slowly. I wrote it very meditatively, not rushing through the process.
You mentioned that when as you were writing this book, as you described to people, some responses were deep resonance and some were resistance, critical approaches to. I want to know more about that. Who is it who's resistant? Who's resistant to beauty? Who says, "Oh, well, I don't need beauty"?
Yeah, honestly, I think
what are their names, Wesley?
You want names? I think you find that in pretty much every circle. I mean, both in Christian circles and in secular circles, artists, especially. As I'm talking with them about this project, some of the responses be like, well, my art is way more than beauty. Like my art is telling the truth. And I interact a bit with someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who would be really critical of this idea that the main task of the arts is to show us reality. And reality is not often very beautiful. There's a lot of ugliness and injustice and all these things, right? So, but again, that goes back to what I think is a misunderstanding, that beauty is this kind of sentimental thing that evades the full brunt of reality, that trivializes evil, and that's not it at all. Yeah. Beauty is the alluring form of reality, which includes the cracks and includes the blemishes.
Yeah. Right. So when somebody says the purpose of their art is to show reality, you don't disagree with that idea, do you?
I don't disagree with that. Yeah.
It's just that beauty is a key element of reality and not something that
it is
sits in opposition or as a replacement for reality.
So I think I could agree with some of those artists in that beauty is not the sole aim of art making and creativity, but it's certainly right there at the core of what the creative process is all about.
Yeah. You quote James K. Smith, who said something along the lines of, there's a lot more to the world than beauty.
Right.
But also there's beauty.
That's right. And I think sometimes statements like that limit the scope of what beauty actually is.
Wait a minute. Statements like Smith's statement, were you?
Yeah, I think, he's wanting to affirm what a lot of artists are saying in that, my work is not primarily about beauty. It's about all kinds of things, right? And while I agree with that, I also want to emphasize that beauty is a part of every aspect of reality. And so as artists trying to do all of these different things, beauty is sort of woven in and through all of that.
Yeah. Right. We've been at this 15 minutes and I haven't mentioned Flannery O'Connor yet. So now's a good time to bring her up. I mean, with this idea, right? I mean, there's, she's certainly committed to the Riven things. And, I think Marilyn Robinson, for instance, I get the impression she's not as excited about Flannery O'Connor as I am, in large part because there is ugliness in O'Connor's work. On the other hand, ultimately, it's in the service of beauty, I think.
I think so too. Yeah, and it's getting at beauty through honest portrayals of the brokenness of the world, characters, stories. Yeah, I love it. And I love her wrestling with wanting those stories and their portrayals of reality to really reveal who God is and how God's created the world.
Yeah. And the only place grace does its work is in this world that's full of riven things.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about this idea of entanglement. Right? You say beauty involves wholeness, but it also involves that wholeness in large part means entanglement. Tell me about it, because I don't think of entanglement. That's an unusual choice of words. I want to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, I love the word entanglement. I probably use it too much, but, because in popular culture, it's not necessarily a good thing to be entangled. Right. Seems like you need to disentangle your life is the call, from all these things. But actually, the most beautiful things are about entanglement, because it's about our interconnectivity, our relationships. And no matter what you're talking about, whether it's the beauty of a story or the beauty of a person or the beauty of an artwork or a landscape, that beauty is about the mingling of all these different elements, right? And that's what I mean by entanglement, that you have this explosion of difference that yet despite all of those different parts, it holds together in an alluring way. And I think the classical ways of talking about beauty emphasized that harmony, that wholeness, that proportionality, so much so that sometimes the essential part of all those differences gets lost, and the beauty of the entanglement of all of those differences.
Yeah. You talk about the combinations, the juxtapositions, the differences that create a fitting and compelling whole.
Yeah.
And the best color in the world, there's a limit to how beautiful that color can be if it's just a blank wall of that color.
Yeah. Well, we wouldn't even know what this blue sky is that I'm looking at right now without the line of green of the trees. If all we knew was blue, it wouldn't be blue, it would just be color, right? But we have blue and green, and it's that stark contrast, that entanglement of blue and green together in this whole view that I have, that is the mark of beauty for me.
Yeah. What are some things you learned about creativity, about the work of the writer's work? As you were writing this book, what did you learn about your work as a writer from pondering beauty like this?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I've done mostly academic writing in my life, so there still is kind of an academic flair to this, and that I'm in conversation with a bunch of people. But this is my movement toward a different kind of writing, and I wanted the way that I wrote this to be fitting to how I experience beauty in the world, which is often, I'll be going about my day and I'll just be struck by something, right? And beauty will kind of come to me like in a burst, and you have that wow moment. Oh man, I've never seen it quite like that before, or wow, that's a good way of putting it, And so I started writing in that way too, that I wanted to just write in vignettes, write in these short bursts of being able to articulate something about beauty, and not to worry about the connective tissue as much. Kind of like as I look back on a day, I don't know exactly how the beauty of, this beautiful landscape relates to the beauty of my son who comes home and tells me about his day.
Yeah.
But they're both there, and I just want them to be there,
Yeah.
and that makes up my day. So there is some, hopefully, intuitive flow to the book, but it doesn't have kind of that typical narrative way. It's more in vignettes and bursts, and that was a really fun creative process for me to do it that way.
Yeah.
And you can move the different parts around and put them together kind of like a puzzle.
Did you move them around a lot?
I did. Yeah, I even moved whole chapters around at one point. But certainly the sections within the chapters I played with a lot.
Yeah. How about your editor? Did your editor move things around for you?
Well, the big discussion with my editor, because something I'm offering in the book is in between each section, encouraging folks to actually pause and take a deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have the scientific symbol for oxygen there, the O, to say, try it. Try to take a breath and read this more meditatively. And I think it works for the most part. My editor's response to that was, it's a lot of breathing. Like, you have to breathe a lot to read this book. And so she suggested that I slowly kind of phase out some of those O's toward the end. And I played with that a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Getting longer sections versus shorter ones.
Yeah.
I love a good editor.
Oh, I know. Aren't they great?
Yeah.
The idea that beauty is profusely available, that's something you talk about. And I guess you can help me out who you're citing here, but the idea that beauty and grace are performed whether or not we will or sense them. Annie Dillard,
yes. Annie Dillard. That's right.
Yeah.
Pilgrim at Tinker Creek.
Yeah. Such a great insight that this world is just bursting with beauty and grace. Most of those beauties we're not paying attention to.
Right.
And also, I love the fact that there's beautiful things happening on the floor of the ocean where nobody's ever going to see them.
Love the mystery of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's certainly not the problem that we don't have enough beauty, right? The issue is that we don't, like Mary Oliver says, we don't stop and be astonished and tell about it. And because that's another way of viewing what I'm trying to do in this book is I tried to practice that, try to stop, notice, pay attention, be astonished. And this book is just trying to tell about it rather than attempting to define what beauty is. I wanted to describe the impact of beauty.
Yeah. What's something you learned to appreciate that you didn't appreciate? What was the last thing that you decided that you realized, oh, there's some beauty that's been there all along and I didn't know?
Well, the writing of this book corresponded with my son's increased fascination with bugs. And I write about that a little bit, particularly beetles. So I did go down a deep, dark hole researching beetles, and I had no idea that beetles comprise, I guess, about 25% of all species on Earth.
Really?
Yeah, 400,000, I think I'm getting that right, different species of beetles. And just, it's amazing, the variety, the beauty, the beetle that's shaped like a violin, the beetle the Hercules beetle, even just the common ladybug. There's so much delight there. And a lot of those beetles, if you stop, pay attention, be astonished, they were right on our little urban plot. I discovered with my son at least 15 different kinds of beetles just in our backyard.
Yeah.
So, I think both the micro and the macro aspects of beauty were the things that most surprised me. So from kind of beetles to also, Webb telescope stuff and the universe.
Yeah. I'm always desirous, let's say, more than successful, but at least desirous of appreciating new art forms.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I manage to appreciate a new art form, and sometimes I don't manage. I'm still trying to get to the point where I really appreciate classical music, and I wonder if it's a moral failing on my part that I just can't get that interested in classical music.
Well, we all have the things that we're more naturally inclined to. What kind of music do you actually like?
Kind of singer-songwriter,
Yeah.
And and I have a soft spot for kind of old school Southern rock kind of thing, Tom Petty and that kind of stuff,
Yeah. So I've been doing some research and reading on the idea of resonance theory.
Mm-hmm.
And this relates to what you're saying, because I was asking the question, can you cultivate resonance with classical music? Which was basically asking the question, can you see the beauty of it? And I think yes is the short answer. And generally speaking, what I'm discovering is that cultivating resonance requires availability, which I've already talked about, basically showing up and being willing to be with it. Perception, perception could be with your ears or eyes, but going beyond looking or merely hearing to like really hearing it and really seeing it. And then some sort of response of how is this impacting me? And I think whether it's abstract art or classical music or I don't know, pick a novelist who's difficult to read. I think it's possible to cultivate more resonance with those art forms that we're less naturally inclined to understand or appreciate.
Yeah. Well, when I took music appreciation in college, that was my first serious attempt to, learn to appreciate classical music. And in that class, the idea of appreciation seemed to be understanding with the figuring out part of understanding the music with the figuring out part of my brain. The assumption was once I understand the form of a sonata, I would appreciate it. And it didn't work. I don't know, and so there's, I guess we're getting off. I don't know if we're getting off topic or not here, but there's an appreciation that involves there's a kind of understanding, I guess, of the forms and the things that I can understand with, I guess I might say, the left side of my brain.
Yeah.
That just doesn't make it over to the other side.
I think one of the most helpful things you can do, if that's the case, or I guess if you want to, right?
I do want
to have more resonance with classical music, is to spend more time with people for whom it does really resonate, and then have those conversations and experiences with those people, because it's usually less about the mathematics and the theory of it and more about that just Gestalt experience. And I've found that that's helpful as I'm trying to learn to appreciate something new.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll give it another try. I may send you an email for additional assistance.
Nice.
Okay. The one more topic I want to touch on. We don't have to spend too long on this necessarily, but you talk about the idea that online entertainment and social media can drive us away from encounters with beauty. How was that?
Yeah, I referenced this cover of I think it was the 90th anniversary edition of the New Yorker, where on one of the covers there's this guy who's looking at his phone and he's all hunched over his phone. And there's a butterfly floating up above his head. So he's missing that encounter with beauty, thinking that it's right here. And, and that's not to say that you can't encounter beauty through your phone.
Sure.
And through social media. But I think beauty can only be mediated for so long without it losing its power.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It can. I have been introduced to beautiful things thanks to the internet.
Oh, for sure.
Yes. But as you said, that's a great way to put it. It can only be mediated for a while.
Yeah, just looking at my friends' photos of their trip out west in Utah and these wonderful desert places. So great. I see the beauty of that, but that's not true appreciation of beauty, right? I need to, makes me long to go there myself with my family and experience it for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good. All right. Well, I want to know, who are the writers who make you want to write?
So many. And unfortunately was able to draw on many of them in the book as well. But boy, I would start with Brian Doyle.
Oh yeah.
He has this stream of consciousness kind of writing, especially in his essays, which is just always surprising and wonderful, especially because his consciousness was so bright.
Yeah.
And even in his novels, there's just so many unexpected things. And
yeah, I've never read his novels. I've only read the essays.
Yeah, I read Mink River.
Okay.
Amazing story. So Brian Doyle for sure. I've mentioned Mary Oliver. I appreciate her simple profundity and how both her poems and her essays are demonstrating her mantra of stopping and being astonished and telling about it.
Yeah.
Mentioned Christian Wyman. Less known though, I want to mention Abigail Carroll and just give her writing a shout out.
I don't know Abigail Carroll.
She's a writer in Vermont and has 2 collections of poems. One, her first collection is called The Habitation of Wonder, or just Habitation of Wonder.
Huh?
Creation-rich poems just bursting with wonderful sounds and combinations of words. But her latest project is called Cup My Days Like Water, and she's written 75 poems based or inspired by the first 75 Psalms. Huh. And she's working on kind of the next one. And yeah, I appreciate her very much. I have all of my theology students read her poems.
Really?
So, yeah.
So you end up reading a good bit of poetry?
I do. I love poetry. Creative nonfiction is a go-to. Always have a novel going, but I've switched over to audiobooks for those. Because I have a commute for the first time in my life, so I'm using that as my novel time. So currently listening to "I Cheerfully Refuse." And, Love
That's
Anger.
A good one.
Yep.
Yeah.
The first writer who inspired me to write was Eugene Peterson.
Is that right?
Read him when I was 17. I just discerned a call to ministry, and I perceived in his writing the kind of creativity that I wanted to have in life, but also in ministry.
A series of sermons he did about David that became the book Leap Over a Wall set me to writing my first novels.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So I have Eugene Peterson's part of my history too. So, all right. Well, Wesley Vander, thanks so much for being here, and thanks for writing this book. I guess it comes out. It's May when we're talking, but this is coming out in the middle of June, correct? Yeah.
Official release date is June 18, but actually, I think most bookstores already have their copies. So,
okay.
It's good news.
Well, by the time this episode comes out, it'll be all over the place. So, thanks for being here. So much fun.
Thanks, Jonathan.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit Membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community. funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.